green, ain't no misdirection.
Alright, Rising Icons. My name is Yussi, and today we're going to be looking at how I approach fishing out a drop. So I'm going to be showing you guys how I layer up a few different drums and what sort of elements I go for, the main elements, a bit of bass design, and then mainly just arrangement and how I go about making a 48 bar drum and bass drop. So for you guys that don't know, I am a drum and bass producer, obviously by the name Yussi. I've actually been a part of Rising Icon since the start, and I was in Defy Society before that for 2 years. So I am really stoked to be able to be here giving you guys some knowledge now. It's a full circle moment for me, having come from being an intermediate to, or a new to intermediate level producer, to be able to give back now. It's really cool. So when I look at making a drum and bass track, the first thing obviously is that we want to make our drum pattern. Now, a typical drum and bass drum pattern, or the elements you need, is a kick, you need a snare, you usually need some form of offbeat hat to sit in between them, like a pretty prominent one. And then we have a range of other percussion. So I have a quarter note hat that sort of drives it. These have a bit of a longer tail. I have an eighth note hat that's a bit quicker. And then I have a 16th note hat that's even quicker than that, obviously. And then later on, I usually bring in some rides. Now, for my side chaining, I actually use Shaper Box 2, which you can see here. So I've set that up. It's on 1/4 length on one shot with the MIDI trigger with an envelope like this. And basically what I do is I will set up a MIDI channel where I just draw some random MIDI notes. It can be any notes. Make them quite short because obviously the length of these determines when that envelope actually starts. And then essentially you leave these on auto and send them to the sidechain, and it should automatically go to the Shaper Box if that's already on there. And then you put those wherever your kick and your snare is. So to begin with, we're going to start with how I layer a kick. So I've got 3 kicks here that I've just grabbed from some random packs I have. So I'll turn off all the EQs so you can hear them how they are alone. So you've got this first one here. So you can hear it's got a lot of thumpy sort of low end. You have this one. I like this one because it has a lot of knock to it, and it has sort of this like mid-range and the high end as a bit of punch to it. And then I like this one here, specifically for the beginning, which is like this little click that's at the beginning here. You can see there's a lot of information. That's a click. So when I go about layering a kick, I look for ones that complement each other by having different features. So to start off with, this one, I actually just want the click from this. So I'm going to turn on this EQ, which is a high pass, and I'm just keeping the start. Now, because I just want the click on this one, I'm actually going to bring this down here. And I'm just going to keep the beginning of it like that. The next one, we got the punchy kick. So this one, you can hear it's a very sort of, it's been pushed through a saturator or some distortion. Now, I don't want the low end from this because I think it's a bit muddy in the low end. It's not thumpy enough. So I'm actually going to turn a high pass filter on that I've made. And I'm just cutting everything below 100 Hertz, and I'm tapering that off from about 400 here, because that allows us to just get that top end punch. And then for the bottom one, you can see this has actually been layered with a percussive element, some form of ride or hat, which I don't really want there. I more just wanted this for the low end. So I turned on this, I made this here where I'm basically tapering it off and cutting off everything above 300 Hertz. You can hear we have like a really nice low end there. So if we put the low end with the mid-range one, you can hear that sounds pretty good, but obviously they're sounding a little bit off. So I might actually, because the low end usually is what rings out at the end, I might bring this kick down And what I might do is line these up a little bit more so that the amplitudes are there. And then over here, I'll add the click. And you can see that nothing else is happening at the beginning. So what we can probably do is actually bring this back a bit and then bring both of these ones back here. We could even try and bring the amplitudes, yeah, like that. Now, obviously, this is not perfect. But it'll do for now. So for our kick pattern, for our drum and bass drums, actually, we probably don't want all of this tail because drum and bass is a fast genre. We're at 174 BPM, so I'm going to bring this back here. And then bring it out. You can hear it loses a lot of character until we get to about this point. So I think that's a healthy sort of region. And then we're going to put this in a classic drum and bass formation here. And now we can move on to our snare. So for the snare, it's the same thing. I've layered a bunch of different snares up, and each of these snares has a different thing about it, a different timbre or a different frequency that's prominent about it, or a different pitch or whatever, that I really enjoy. And they all serve a different purpose. So to begin with, this is a more snappy one. I like this for the snap it has at the start. It's a high-end hit. We then have the second one. And I like this for the reverb tail it has. It has a nice spatial tail up to it. This one here. This has a really live element to it. So you can hear it has some nice noise to it. And it sounds live. It has a bit of its own reverb to it. We got this one here. And I really like this for that low-end sort of pop that it has, the boop. And then we have this last one. And this has like a nice little noise tail that rings out. So to begin with, we'll start with the clap one here. So I just want the top end. You can hear none of this is really needed. That you lose too much character here. So yeah, just above 1K, that's pretty good. For the reverb one, I just want the same thing. None of this bottom. There you get the character of it. And actually, because this track is going to be an F, I'm going to show you how I pitch these later on, but we'll get to that in a second. The noise slap here. Just want the noise from that one, so we're going to apply the top end there only. Now for the low one, you can hear that I've actually pronounced this frequency here, which is the main one I'm looking for. And I've allowed some of the highs in, but not too many. And then for the last one, I just want that noise there. So that's going to be very high. Maybe even down to 1K there as well. So if we layer all these up now, we can hear that it's sounding good. Nothing's really clashing too much, but they all have different keys. So if I show you the main track. So it's an F, so a ba, 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 ba. So we're sort of wanting to change the pitch of these to fit the key a bit more. So to start with the tail. Now this is just a kilohertz frequency shifter, which I've applied because it lets you fine tune. Frequency shifting is better for pitching drums generally compared to pitch shifting because of the algorithm and the way it works. So now you can hear that's in line with the key of the track. It sounds like it fits with the key of the track. The next one here, your low one. That already sounds like it's that because that sample originally was F in F. I think that's actually better without the frequency shifter, so I'll leave that. That sounds in key. The reverb here, turn that on. I put that down actually, negative 488. And I actually don't want all of that, so I just want that in the background. And then the last one, the clap. Might actually add another one to this. Frequency shifter. So now if we add all of these together, we can hear that they sound a bit more cohesive. But now to make these even more fused together, I'm going to chuck a drum bus on here. See, that brings a lot of the snap to it, so maybe I won't do that. I might actually chuck a glue compressor on here. So bring down the threshold. Bring the makeup gain to about 10 or 11, because that's how much reduction we're getting. We're actually going to soft clip them too. And now after this, I might actually apply the kilohertz transient shaper. Just give it a bit of a tap. And now if we put this with our kick, so then we'll duplicate that, because the snare pattern in drum and bass is sort of like this. Now we have a nice little starting point. So now if we go to the hat, the offbeat hat, we got two elements here. We got it's similar to a ride, but it's more of like an open hat, somewhere between that and a ride. So I like that for the tail. And then I have the second one here for the tick. Now together, they sound pretty good. Add these with the snare and the kick. Now we add our quarter note hats for drive, the 8th note hats, 16th note, and then rides. Now we don't need all of this right now. In fact, I'll probably turn off the 16th note hats and the rides and just solo the drums. And that sounds pretty good. So I think we're done there with the drums. Put the kick and the snare and the offbeat hat and the chord note hats and all this back where it was. We've got our side chain set up, so we got it underneath the kick, the snare, and then the kick and the snare over here as well. And now we've essentially got a drum beat to start with. So what we can do is we'll copy this 4 times. And now when we get to the end of the bar, we're going to want some form of fill. Now what I like to do is a simple kick and snare fill here. So something like this. So we can probably duplicate this snare and remove the offbeat hat that's there. And then probably duplicate this kick and put it on the last little bar. So now when we listen to the drum loop, now there's a lot of different ways that you can do this, but this is just one thing. And essentially it's a call or response thing. So we're finishing off the loop. We're finishing off those 4 bars here. So that's enough with the drums. We'll put those here. And what we can do actually is add another side chain. because we have another snare there and a kick. And now we can move on to our basses. So, drop basses. The first one that we're going to be looking at is a downbeat bass. Now this is a two-layered sound. We've got a 808 that I've actually, it was like this, but I brought it in using the divide by 2 sign here on the tempo. So it only sits for that first bar. And then we've got a tonal layer. And together, you got the bass and the tonal layer like this. Now, when we want to make a downbeat, the characteristics of a downbeat is that it is a punchy, quick sound that happens at the start, and then it allows us to bring our main bass in after that. So what I did in here is I made this patch in Serum. Now notice the first thing here is that we have an envelope. Our envelope 1 actually has a pretty quick decay time. So I've applied this, obviously envelope 1 in Serum affects your overall volume, but I've also applied this to the cutoff and the drive of a low pass filter. And what that means is that when it starts, it punches up, it drives it up and has the full cutoff. And then this pretty quickly comes down. This creates punch, it creates transient. I've then added a sub, but I've only leveled this a little bit. Basically, this sub is going to be run through the distortion with our tonal layer here. And that is what will create the grit to the sound. So I'm going to turn off all my post-processing effects. And I'm going to turn off all my effects in Serum. And you can hear there that the sound's pretty tame. Essentially what I've done is I've put on a basic shapes onto a sine wave. And I've gone into the wavetable editor here. And I've actually added this in bin 8. Now, I added that because I wanted that specific tone. Boom. I've also added a little other harmonics here to add some variation, but they're not really doing much. You could just get away with doing that. Now I could add in something like this, but I've just chosen to do bin 8 for this one. Now that tone and this sub, so it's just the tone, just the sub, and obviously you got your noise. They all run through a phaser first. Now I've turned the rate, depth, and frequency down, and it gives a bit of a guitar amp feel. I'll put some hyperdimension on with low mixes to get a bit of stereo. And then I've run them through the distortion, which is a tube on 93%. This is where a lot of the magic happens. See, without the sub here, you don't get a lot of grit, but by adding it, we do. Now, too much, and it's just too distorted. So I'm adding in about 14%. Maybe 16 will work. Something around there. I've then added an EQ, which is being affected by envelope 1 again, because this, as you can see, now shapes the sound to and keeps it in control, because adding distortion can add more frequencies that spill out. So we want this to be controlled in the envelope that we originally intended, which is this one here. And then after that, I've added some multiband compression where I've just basically boosted the gain. And that's pretty much it for Serum. Now, outside of Serum, I added a corpus on Beam. So basically, you work the tuning around to how you want. So I might actually put this down to F. And then you can mess around with this here. But this is just adding a bit of a resonance to it. We could probably actually drop the dry wet down on that. Just adds a bit of wonkiness to it. We've got an auto filter here, where the automation looks like this. That's just controlling the sound a little bit more. We've got an OTT where I've boosted the output and turned down the sub output here. So now we have no sub coming through because anything below 88 Hertz is now being cut. I a drum bus where I boosted the drive to 40% and the transients to 0.57. And then I've got an EQ8, which is just cutting everything below the fundamental tone here. See, above this, you lose your tone. We want this resonant peak here. And then we allow the sub to come through from the 808. So that's our first hit on the drop. So if I turn off the other sounds, and I just have a little pre-drop vocal here.
Ain't no misdirection.
The next thing we're going to do is move on to our main bass, which is this one. Now this is a pretty classic sustain sort of bass, but we can do a lot with this. Now I'm going to go through, because this is a 3-layered sound. The first thing I did was basically made this patch here. So I've got a B-sod square wavetable and a basic WRD, which is at 3 octaves and 4 semitones above. And the FM of oscillator A is being affected by this one that is way further up. Now I moved around wavetables. Originally they started on saws, but once you've made the patch, you can variate the wavetables and each of them will have different tonalities until you find one that really fits. But the main idea is that this oscillator, and keep in mind that all these notes are being written in F0. Same here for the downbeat one. So we go back to this one. What I did was essentially, I took this wavetable and I found a nice spot with the FM. And then I went to the filter here and I actually did a band 24 and I moved the cutoff around until it sort of synced up, because this is only affecting oscillator B, as you can see. Until it synced up with the main tone, the resonant tone that was coming out of that oscillator. So it takes away a lot of the other crap that's on each side and just leaves you with that clean tone. Now I've got a sub, which is a saw wave. And then after that, I'm just doing tube distortion. Now, when we get into the next layer, all I did was I copied the first one, but for this one, instead of 4 semitones on the oscillator B, I did +7, and I moved the cutoff a little bit up to suit. I then changed the wavetables so that it was a slightly different tone, and instead of using a saw for the sub, I used a sine wave so it was cleaner. Same sort of distortion. Now when you put these together, see, this is the main sound, which is your middle one, the +7. But when you add the first one we made and then reduce the volume, it gives you that tone that's almost like a negative harmonic of the main one, and it adds more depth. It's more of a chord now, because we have the +4, we have the +7, which is this one, and we have the +4, which is the first one we made, which is a little bit lower, but we don't want that as prominent, because then it sounds too cluttered. We want this, we want the middle one, the +7, to be the main one. We want this one to be down. And then the lowest one is a sub. So essentially, wrong one here. It's just a sine wave, which is creating a single note here. And then on oscillator A, I made it a sine wave, and then instead of adding this one here, because that's already being taken by the sub, I've just added 2, 3, and 4. Now if we put this onto a high res, you can see our sub is this one, and then 2, 3, and 4 is what 2, 3, and 4 here. And then I have no effects on that. So then, because these are all written in F0, It means that I can write it, this three layered patch, I can just use one MIDI note. Now, in terms of the post-processing, on the sub, I added some saturation and then EQ'd it back down so that it's just the sub region there. I also did a volume automation so that it only comes in after our first hit is done. We could have just started it here, but I wanted that little tick that goes up. So it goes ba-wah instead of ba-wah. You can hear that little ramp up that happens right as this is sort of tapering off and not much is happening. And for our middle two sounds, I've got some compression, so OTT with a bunch of output drives, 16 dB. I've got an auto pass filter, which is filtering up here so that it sort of gets out the way of the first hit. I've got an EQ that basically EQs up until that fundamental tone, which is that one there. So anything below that we don't need because the sub takes care of it. I've then got a reverb. So basically this is just a parallel chain. So I've got one chain with 100% dry wet, which is way down. It's about -17 dB. And then I've got our dry chain with nothing on it. And then I've got a vinyl distortion. Vinyl distortion is really cool because it adds stereo down here. And it also adds a bit of a grittier but controlled tone to it. See, that's harsh and it's right dead center. It's not wide enough. But when we add it and we move stuff around, basically just this and this parameter. Now it's a lot wider, it's a lot bigger and thicker, it sounds cleaner. And I essentially did the exact same thing with the other one. Now you can change them around to how you like. With the other one, I actually have an overdrive here, whereas I don't on the second. But it's about swapping and changing your different effects. I won't get too much into post-processing because that's not the main aim of this one. Now when we go after this, so after all of these layers have come out, I have an EQ8 here which is doing some mid-side EQ. So you go into mid-side mode, and then you change to the mid one, and I've just cut everything off below about, I'll say 20 Hertz. And then for the sides, I've cut everything off below about 220. Or at least tapering them off. And that's just controlling so that we don't get any information in the lows. You can see we have our side information here. So if we add that to our first bass, we have something like that, and that's definitely workable. So now I'm going to basically write out this bass, and we'll make a melody out of it. So let's start with that. Control J there over this highlighted region to make our clip longer. Now, when we get to the end of this, we're going to want to have some form of fill. And I'll show you that in a second. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to duplicate this now. So everything. So usually once you've written out the main melody, we're going to repeat this, do something different, but then at the end we want to have some form of fill, which is going to be another sound. Now typically in drum and bass, respaces are used for this. You can use whatever you want, but for the sake of this, I'll use a respace. I'm actually not going to put that there, I'm going to put that here. So the first thing we're going to want to do is variate on the melody. So what I'm doing is on the last one, when we come back up to this fourth bar, it's C0. Here I'm going to put it up to C1. And now instead of having that little F sharp at the end that it goes back up to, I'm actually cutting it for the last two bars. And I'm putting a respace. Like this. So what we could do is we could actually go in, we could add a kilohertz pitcher after this. Now I do use the kilohertz pitcher quite a lot because I really like this plugin. It's one of the best pitch shifting plugins I've found that you can use in post-processing that doesn't mess the sound up. So I highly recommend it. You don't need to do it, but I would recommend it. Do wow, something like that. So let's try this again. Before we get there, for our pre-drop, we're actually going to, we've warped this, and I want to start clicking and getting the transients on the beats.
Misdirection. Green ain't no 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 misdirection.
See, that's a lot more on time because we've now warped this properly.
Green ain't no misdirection.
Ween on one, in on the second, miss on the third, and then a half step on die from the direction, and then
direction.
The last syllable that sits on the last half bar, and we extended that out.
Green ain't no misdirection.
So that'll be our pre-drop.
Green ain't no misdirection.
Maybe G sharp actually works there. So now we can basically copy this all the way over again. Over here, I'll get to the build part. But that's one option. And this essentially just uses one main bass. You often hear this in a lot of jump up tunes. What I like doing is having more of a call and response thing. So what I've actually got here is I've got these response basses. What I'm going to do is instead of repeating the main bass here, I'm going to make a response section. So let's start. So we can move that out of the way of the first hit, out of the downbeat. Now essentially what this is an 808 on F. We got another bass. It's just like a squelchy sample. And then we got this one, which is a bit more of like a tonal defined sample. And if you put those together, might even bring this woo bass a little bit back. Now, essentially, we just want to make a melody with this that complements the first one. Now, if you want to pitch everything up at once, double click on one and then hold Command and click on the other ones as well, and then we can pitch this up. Over here, I'm going to click on everything again. So double click on one so it opens up this, and then Command and click on all the others. And I actually want to make these shorter, but it's not letting me do that. So I'm going to have to do it manually. So what I'm going to do, let's go on to the first one here and go half. I'm going to go onto this one and go half. And going on this one, and I'm going to go half. And then you can double those. Then we'll copy that over. So now we get something like this. And then at the end, instead of doing the last two notes here, we'll leave that for our Reese fill, which we originally had. And now on this section, we can variate. So we can have the first one that we made, but it's slightly variated so that last little note, remember, is further up. Oh, my bad on that one. Take that out of there. Then we'll duplicate that all again. So what you can immediately hear is that this sample here, or this response bass, it's sounding a bit stuttery. So what we might do is we might try and improve the smoothness between the notes. So one thing we can do for that is adding reverb. So there's another reverb parallel chain. We've got a dry chain, duplicated that, and added a reverb on it 100% wet. And immediately you can hear that that adds some tail. So it's almost like connecting the pieces. Now another thing you can do is we can go into the post-processing. We can go into the group and we can add some multi-band compression. And what we can actually do is we can stack this with an OTT. Add the time because it's a bit of a transient sound, so we don't want it to be crunched immediately. And then add output. And then bring the amount down. So we put the output quite far up and then we bring the amount down. So now if we take these off, turn it back on. We might increase this reverb. We might even increase the decay. And we want to move the low cut and the high cut around so that it doesn't interfere too much with the low end. So now if we play it. So now it's sounding like this woo bass is a little bit too prominent, so I might boost the tonal one and reduce that. I see the envelope there with the auto filter came back. So now if we start again.
Green ain't no misdirection.
Now when we get to this part, often what I like doing is cutting all of the main drums, so delete all of those, and we bring in more build styles of drums. So we got a build kick here. Now typically for your build kick, you don't want to be too weighted and punchy so that it overpowers your mix and your main kick. We want to have a lot of high end. We also got a snap or a snare, which is going twice as fast, and we got a clap. And then when we get halfway through these, we're actually going to double the speed of them. So start here, Control E, then I'm going to double that. And I might increase the clap as well here. And I might increase the snare as well. And then we add a little riser here that we want to cut off. And then what we can do is we can add our pre-drop back in that last little bit. So now this is what our drop sounds like essentially.
Green ain't no misdirection.
So now we have a drop idea fished out. So let's group everything together. Well, not group everything together. We're going to close all the groups up here. And another thing that we can add is a backing layer with a vocal that's sort of sidechained. So I've got this vocal drone here, or this Atmos. So it's just a vocal, it's just a syllable. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm using a kilohertz pitcher. You could also just pitch this up in the clip. And I also want to remember to turn this to Complex Pro and turn the formants and the envelope down so that it retains the original sound. And then I pitch that up with the kilohertz pitcher +2 so that it gets to the same key as our track. And then something I like to do here is to add a shaper box. Actually, I won't use a shaper box because I find that some of you might not have it. So I'll use a utility because it's just as good. But basically just doing a volume shape. So I'm going to repeat that, and then we're going to make a shape that sort of creates this sidechain effect. So what we do is we do something like this. Did that in the wrong area. It's actually twice as long. So what we do now is we put this here, but obviously now what we can also do is not have it fully down the bottom. Maybe a little bit more. So now we have this like backing layer.
Green ain't no misdirection.
And we'll bring the volume of that down.
Direction.
So now we've got a full drop loop or a drop idea fished out. So when we go into the next section, we want to start variating on this. So the first thing we do is we might start adding some other drums. So we've got our quarter and our eighth note drums here, but we might start adding the 16th note hats and maybe the rise. So we're going to delete these from the first one. Now, you can also do the eighth note hats at like a lower volume. So we can automate the volume here and bring it down a bit at the start. So it's still there, but not as prominently. So as we go into this second half of the drop, now what happens is we've added some faster drums, so it's sort of driving it along more. But what we could also do is go to our main bass and variate on it. So we might duplicate this whole layer here, delete the second duplication from the first section and delete the first from the second. And now with this one, we can start working. So specifically on this +7 one, we might want to bring this down now. And essentially, just by lowering the main fundamental tone for that main bass, lowering it down to +4, we've created this variation now where it sounds cohesive because it's the same sound, but slightly varied. We could also bring the cutoff down here because we've brought that down. So that it's pronouncing it, because now our main tone is shifted below where this resonant peak is acting on from the filter, so we're bringing it down to make it act on that. Keep in mind, I've got the piano on here, so click that on and then find your peak, because that means when you start changing notes after that, it'll adjust it. I've also got mono legato and always on, and I've got it about just before half, and that's on all 3 of the patches. And that creates that little glide at the end or between each note. So basically, that is how I would go about fishing out a drop idea. So if we listen to it from the start.
Green ain't no misdirection.
And then if you want to add another section, so go from 32 to 48 bars, you can also variate. So you can variate more on the bass here. You can add in the rides more, so we could duplicate that and then add in these rides. But just subtle changes are all you really need, and it keeps it cohesive. You don't need to do stuff that's too different. But I'll keep the video to that length. I hope that's helped you guys gauge how to sort of fish out a D&B drop a little bit more if you were new to it. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks so much. See you guys later. If you want to check out my stuff, it's Yussi on Spotify, and at Yussi on Instagram and TikTok, and Yussi on SoundCloud, obviously. See you guys later. Cheers.